It begins in silence. A dim red light pulses through a narrow room, the kind only photographers once knew. Glass trays line the counter, filled with milky chemicals that breathe faint wisps of smoke. Each drip echoes like a clock in a mausoleum. Somewhere a heartbeat begins to sync with it. A sheet of paper floats inside the tray, blank at first. Then, under the crimson glow, an image starts to emerge. Soft lines, shadows forming, a face taking shape, a woman in black lace, sitting perfectly still. Her expression is unreadable, calm but hollow. Beside her stands a young man, his hand resting lightly on her chair. His eyes are fixed somewhere beyond the lens, cold and distant. But behind them, something moves. At first it looks like a trick of exposure, a faint smudge on the wall. But as the details sharpen, the smudge becomes form. A shoulder, a head, fingers resting gently upon the woman's right shoulder. Except, there was no one else in the room when the photograph was taken. The developer's assistant steps closer, peering through the red haze. The air thickens, heavy with the smell of silver nitrate. The woman's reflection in the glass plate seems to breathe. Her lips curl into the faintest smile. Yet in the photo itself, she remains still. The assistant blinks. The lights flicker, and for a fraction of a second, the woman in the reflection turns her head. Then the room falls into total darkness. The heartbeat returns, louder now, fast, erratic. From somewhere in the dark, a faint voice whispers, hoarse, deliberate, almost reverent. Eleanor. The chemical tray crashes to the floor, the liquid spreading like blood. The half-developed photograph slides down the counter, glowing faintly from within, as if burning from the inside out. Then another whisper, barely audible through the static hum, she shouldn't have married him. A final crack, like old glass breaking. Cut to black. The title fades in, one letter at a time. The widow who married her slave's son, Savannah's forbidden wedding of 1839. The story begins in Savannah, Georgia, 1839. A year when the air itself felt too still, as if the city was holding its breath. The cobblestone streets shimmered with the aftertaste of rain, slick and silver beneath the gaslight. Iron gates creaked softly in the night breeze, and from the harbor came the distant groan of ships, echoes of a city that thrived on things best left buried. And in the heart of it all stood Whitford Manor, a mansion pale as bone, its shutters sealed tight, its garden overgrown and silent. Locals called it the house that mourned too long. Even by day, its windows reflected nothing but gray. Inside that mansion had once lived Eleanor Whitford, a widow of 32. She was known for her beauty, not the kind born of youth, but of poise, precision, and quiet sorrow. Her late husband, Charles Whitford, a wealthy cotton merchant, had been found dead 2 winters earlier under what the coroner called natural causes. But Savannah's servants whispered differently. They said Charles's body had not been discovered in his bed, but in the garden, his face pressed into the mud, his hands clawing at something invisible. Some swore there were bruises around his neck, faint, as if made by unseen hands. Others spoke of muddy footprints leading toward the house, not away. For months after, the estate lay empty, curtains drawn, windows boarded shut. The townspeople crossed the street rather than glance at it, until one cold autumn evening, a single light appeared once again in the east window. Eleanor had returned, but this time, she was not alone. A man came with her, young, tall, silent, with eyes that saw too much. His skin was the deep brown of polished mahogany, and though he said little, the servants swore they'd seen him before. Once in uniform, once carrying trays, once kneeling. His name was Samuel. He had been a servant in that very house, and now, impossibly, dangerously, he was Eleanor's husband. Their marriage defied law, faith, and every rule of the South. Yet in that house, beneath candlelight and silence, they made it official. Somewhere, someone captured that moment. The forbidden wedding portrait of Eleanor and Samuel Whitford. A single photograph. A token of love that should never have existed. But when that photograph was finally developed, something was wrong. The bride's face, serene. The groom's eyes, closed as if in sleep. And behind them both, just barely visible in the dim exposure, a third figure standing in the darkness. Watching. That was the first time people began to whisper that Eleanor Whitford's wedding should never have happened. The screen fades to black. A faint static hum creeps in, low and rhythmic, the kind you hear from a dying radio or the whispering buzz of an old phonograph. It lingers for several seconds, almost like a heartbeat. Then, a click. A calm, deliberate voice slices through the silence. "You're watching Truth Uncaged," it says softly, each word echoing like a secret meant only for those who dare to listen. Where the past doesn't rest, it waits. The hum deepens as the screen flickers to life. An image fades in, aged, cracked, and fragile. The 1839 wedding portrait, a piece of history that should have stayed forgotten. Eleanor Whitford stands in the frame, dressed in mourning black rather than white. Her veil glows faintly under digital restoration light. Her expression is delicate, restrained, her gaze hauntingly direct. Beside her stands Samuel, his posture strong, his eyes closed, frozen in an eternal moment that doesn't feel quite peaceful. But it's what's behind them that chills the air. The faint outline of a third figure, blurred, indistinct, standing near the back wall. Too tall to be a trick of the furniture, too clear to be an accident. You've probably seen old photos like this before. The narrator continues, the voice calm but tightening with unease. But look closer. What do you see? A pause. The static hum returns, now pulsing like a heartbeat. Historians called it a trick of the light. Skeptics claimed it was double exposure. But those who have seen the original print, the one kept sealed in the Whitford family archives, say it changes. Slowly, over time. The screen zooms in on the photo, grain by grain, frame by frame, until the candle-lit faces begin to distort. The woman's eyes shimmer faintly. The shadow behind them flickers, shifting, almost breathing. The narrator lowers his tone, barely above a whisper. Tell me in the comments below, do you believe this photograph is merely a relic of forbidden love? Or proof that something or someone refused to let go? The heartbeat grows louder, faster, then stops. Silence. For several seconds, nothing moves. Then, the faint creak of an old door, the echo of footsteps across a wooden floor, and finally a voice, distant, trembling, like it's coming from the past. It wasn't supposed to happen that night. The static swells, the image fades to black, and the voice of the host returns, almost a whisper now. Let's go back to where it all began. Savannah, 1839. Savannah, Georgia, 1839. A city of wealth and decay, where the air hung heavy with the sweetness of magnolia and the iron scent of something darker. The Civil War was still decades away, but its ghost had already begun to whisper through the soil. In the chains that rattled quietly at night, in the prayers that never reached heaven, beneath the laughter of the elite, beneath the candlelit masquerades and ballroom chatter, lay a world that smelled of salt, sweat, and fear. Every grand house had secrets, but none like the Whitford estate. The mansion sat at the edge of the marshlands, pale, tall, and silent. Its white columns gleamed in the sun by day, but after dusk, its reflection in the water below seemed to twist, as if something unseen stirred just beneath the surface. Locals called it the Widow's Rest, but most avoided speaking its name after sunset. Servants came and went. Some vanished entirely. Others refused to say what they'd seen inside. They spoke of cold spots in the halls and of a window that never stayed closed, no matter how many times it was nailed shut. After Charles Whitford's death, a death the coroner swore was natural, but the servants whispered was not, the house fell silent. Curtains drawn. The fountain is dry. Only the ravens remained, perched along the balcony railings, as if waiting for something to return. Then, one humid spring evening, something did. Eleanor Whitford came home, but she wasn't alone. Walking a step behind her was a man the town recognized, but not like this. Samuel, once a servant, now walking beside her as an equal, his dark eyes calm, his posture straight, his silence heavy with meaning. The whispers began immediately. Some said Eleanor had freed him after her husband's death. Others claimed Samuel had disappeared into the swamps and returned only after something called him back. At first, their closeness seemed harmless, a grieving widow seeking comfort. But soon, neighbors saw them together, in the garden at dusk, hands almost touching, her laughter echoing faintly through the vines. And then, a rumor took root that the widow of Whitford had done the unthinkable. That love had crossed a line no one in Savannah dared to imagine. But in the widow's rest, love wasn't the only thing buried deep within the soil. Something else had stayed behind, and it had just begun to wake. It began as most hauntings do, not with screams or shattering glass, but with silence. A silence that pressed against the walls like a breath held too long. It lingered in the corridors, in the corners of mirrors, in the empty space between heartbeats. At first, no one dared to name it. The servants whispered, crossing themselves as they passed the grand staircase. They said the house sighed at night, that its windows fogged from the inside out, as if something unseen were breathing behind the glass. Candles burned after being snuffed out. Footsteps echoed down the marble hall even when every soul was accounted for. And every morning the mirrors were cold to the touch, slick with condensation, as if they'd been crying. Eleanor dismissed it all at first. She told herself it was imagination, the fever of gossip, the tremor of loneliness. She had buried her husband, Charles Whitford, nearly a year ago. Yet his presence still clung to the air like smoke that refused to clear. Even now, when she walked past the study, she swore she could smell his pipe, the sweet, earthy tobacco blend only he used. She would pause, listening, and somewhere deep within the house, a floorboard would creak, slow and deliberate, like a response. Samuel noticed it too, the sound of dripping water behind dry walls, the faint hum of a melody in an empty parlor, the same waltz Eleanor had danced to the night Charles died. Then, one stormy evening, while repairing a cracked wall in the study, Samuel's chisel struck something hollow. Behind the plaster, wrapped in aged linen, was a small leather-bound journal. Its pages were warped and stained, its ink faded. But one line was still perfectly legible, as though freshly carved into the paper. "I will not leave this house unfinished." Samuel brought it to Eleanor in silence. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, then froze. Stamped into the back cover were the initials, C.W., Charles Whitford. That night, the dogs refused to enter the house. The shutters banged against the windows, though the air outside was still, and at midnight, Eleanor woke to find the fireplace blazing, though no one had lit it. "Love isn't cursed," she whispered, pressing the journal to her chest. "It's remembered." But the house remembered too. It reminded me of betrayal. It remembered death, and somewhere deep within its bones, beneath the rotting beams and the scent of magnolia and ash, something began to move. A low, steady thump echoed through the halls. Once, twice, a heartbeat. The sound of something long buried, learning again how to breathe. The day ended as it always had, with the soft metallic ring of the brass bell. Once it had meant freedom. The children's eager dash into the sunlight, laughter spilling down the hallways. But today, the sound carried a different weight. It echoed through the empty classroom like a warning, long and hollow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The children packed their books with quiet hands, their smiles thin, unsure. The teacher, Miss Hawthorne, lingered by the doorway, her pale fingers brushing the worn frame of the door as each student stepped out. She offered the faintest smile, but even she could feel the shift in the air, the chill that seeped in through the cracks in the window panes. When the last child disappeared down the hall, a cold gust swept through the empty room. The candle flames flickered, casting shadows that danced unnaturally on the walls. Miss Hawthorne's gaze drifted to the chalkboard, still bearing a phrase she did not recall writing. "Never forget." Her brow furrowed. The children had not written those words, and yet there they remained, jagged, uneven, echoing a hand that should no longer exist. As she reached to erase it, a faint giggle rippled through the corner of the room. a sound she had heard before, the very night the class photograph was taken. It was high, airy, impossibly delicate, yet it carried a weight of sorrow that pressed on her chest. Miss Hawthorne froze, her hand hovering over the chalkboard. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward the old class portrait hanging above the teacher's desk. There in the back row, beyond the children who were supposed to be captured forever on film, stood a shadow. A small girl, her long hair matted, her dress torn and faded. Her head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable, and then she noticed it. The eyes. Wide, unblinking, staring directly at the viewer. Eyes that should not have existed, belonging to a child who had been buried 2 days before the photograph was taken. A chill crawled up Miss Hawthorne's spine. She took a step back, the floorboards creaking beneath her. That photograph would never be retaken. Hollow Creek Elementary would close its doors. Parents would whisper of the cursed picture and the girl who refused to rest. But the image remained, frozen in sepia and shadow. A reminder that some presences do not fade. They linger, watching, waiting, and for anyone who dared to look too closely, the eyes would follow, silent, patient, unforgiving. For decades, the 1899 Hollow Creek school photograph rested quietly in the town archives, framed behind cracked glass, slowly yellowing with age. Most visitors passed it without a second glance, charmed only by the neatly dressed children lined up in rows, their small hands folded and faces stiff with forced smiles. Yet, for anyone who lingered, who dared to look long enough, a subtle unease would creep over them. A chill that started at the nape of the neck, spreading slowly down the spine. Something was not right. In 1937, Clara Winslow, a meticulous local historian, began cataloging the town's early records. Her eyes caught the photograph immediately, more out of habit than curiosity. But as she examined it, she found a note pinned to the back, written in uneven, trembling script. "Do not display. Children claim to see her again." The bell rings when no one's there. Clara's pulse quickened. She lifted the photograph into the soft afternoon light, examining every detail. The photographer's signature, J. Hollis, had been crudely scratched out. Her fingers traced the faded scratches, then moved to the paper backing, which seemed slightly loose. Carefully, she peeled it back. Beneath it, another layer appeared, an earlier exposure, almost invisible at first. It showed the same classroom, the same desks, yet the children's faces were smeared, blurred as if they were moving, fading into shadow. All except one, the little girl in the torn dress. Her face remained impossibly sharp, her gaze direct, unwavering, almost accusing. She was watching. Clara leaned closer, heart pounding. It became clear that this photograph was not one image, but two, layered atop each other. One taken before the tragedy, capturing innocence unaware of what was to come. One taken after, documenting absence, grief, and something unnatural, and yet, somehow, the girl who had died in the fire appeared in both. Present. Alive. Or perhaps not alive in any sense that made sense. Clara shivered, realizing the photograph was more than a record of a school class. It was a window, a fragment of time that refused to remain still. A record that refused to obey the laws of life and death. Every line, every shadow whispered of a presence that could not be ignored. And as she set the photograph back into its frame, she could not shake the certainty that the little girl was still watching, waiting for anyone to notice. Because some moments, once captured, do not fade. They linger, silent, patient, unyielding. The Hollow Creek photograph had secrets, and they were only beginning to be understood. By the time the photograph's dark secret reached local rumor, it had already ensnared its first victim, Clara Winslow herself. A meticulous historian, she had devoted months to cataloging Hollow Creek's archives, her fascination with the 1899 school photo growing into an obsession she could not escape. In the summer of 1938, neighbors began to notice changes. Clara grew reclusive. Her door remained shut, her windows shuttered, even at noon when sunlight normally poured into the rooms. Those brave enough to glance through the curtains sometimes glimpsed her silhouette at her desk, hunched over, the photograph spread before her. Lips moved in whispers and pleading, bargaining, or perhaps arguing with something unseen. The soft tick of the mantel clock and the occasional rustle of paper were the only sounds breaking the eerie stillness. On August 11th, tragedy struck. A fire erupted in Clara's home. By the time the town's fire brigade arrived, the building was fully engulfed. Neighbors could do nothing but watch as flames consumed years of study, notes, and countless irreplaceable documents. Yet when the smoke cleared, one thing remained, untouched, unscathed, impossible. The photograph! The flames had reduced wood, paper, and glass to ash. But there it was, sitting in its frame, the image crisp and clear, the edges only slightly blackened. The fire chief called it impossible, but the townsfolk whispered, cursed. A few days later, Clara's sister returned to collect belongings. She claimed to hear a faint sound echoing from the ruins, a single bell chime, followed by the delicate, haunting laughter of a child. No one dared enter again. The photograph was seized by the county office, catalogued in a file ominously marked unsafe material, do not handle. For decades, it rested unseen, its secrets locked away. Then, in 2004, a digital archivist stumbled upon the image during a database scan. It was uploaded online, and with that act, the story awoke again. Viewers reported unnerving phenomena. Faces emerging from shadows that had been empty seconds before, eyes following the observer across the screen, movements too subtle to be explained by editing. One restorer swore she saw Clara herself in the glass of the scanned photograph, seated beside the little girl in the torn dress, her expression pale, almost pleading, yet impossibly silent. The photograph, it seemed, was no longer confined to Hollow Creek. It had crossed time, reaching anyone who dared to stare long enough, and it was far from finished. Some presences never leave. They wait, watching, patient, relentless. For nearly a century, the 1899 school photograph existed only as a whisper, a cautionary tale shared in hushed tones along Savannah's streets and whispered during historical tours. Few dared examine it closely. Those who did reported chills, a creeping sense that the eyes in the photo were following them, that the girl in the torn dress was more than just an image on paper. Time seemed to protect the secret, burying the photograph in forgotten boxes and dusty archives. Then, in 2004, the past clawed its way back into the present. During the digitization of old records for public access, the 1899 school photo resurfaced. Scanned, restored, and uploaded online, it appeared innocent. Children in their uniforms, their faces blurred with age, yet somehow distinct. Overnight it went viral. Thousands clicked, intrigued by the eerie composition. Many dismissed it as early photographic quirks, faded eyes, blurred smiles, or accidental double exposures. But for some, the image was far more disturbing. Viewers reported changes, subtle, impossible. The number of children seemed to shift with each reload. One student claimed a child's expression transformed from joy to terror between clicks. Another noticed hands emerging from shadows, limbs belonging to no one stretching across the rows of desks. Then came the disappearances. 3 local historians investigating Hollow Creek vanished without trace. Their research notes disappeared, social media accounts erased. Among them was Henry Latimer, last seen on a live stream. He stared at the screen, whispering almost to himself. "It's not a photo. It's a window." The feed cut abruptly. Viewers assumed a prank. Authorities found no trace of him. His apartment was empty, save for his laptop. The school photo glowing faintly on the screen, even after the electricity had been turned off. Soon after, Truth Uncaged received an anonymous message. No name, no signature, only a file attachment and 3 ominous words. "Don't let it fade." The file contained the highest resolution scan of the photograph ever seen. As the team studied it, a new detail emerged, subtle, buried deep in the grain. A pressed face, faint but unmistakable, appeared against the inside of the glass. Lips slightly parted, eyes wide. The girl in the torn dress, and someone else, someone who had never left. Time had tried to erase this image, tried to bury its horror in shadows and silence. But it failed, and now the photograph's true secret was awakening. Once again, some things it seemed cannot be forgotten. They wait patiently, just beneath the surface, until someone looks long enough to see. There's a disquieting unease in the way the 1899 school photograph seems to watch those who study it. Those who've stared long enough say the same thing. The reflection in the glass does not match the room behind them. It's as if the photograph isn't capturing what once was, but rather what is, or what's waiting to be seen now. The eyes of the children, frozen on paper for over a century, seem to shift just slightly when no one is looking directly. The girl in the torn dress, ever watchful, draws the gaze, but the shadows around her suggest someone, or something else is there as well. Forensic experts, called in to analyze the photo under infrared light, uncovered a detail that chilled them. A faint inscription, almost invisible, was etched into the bottom corner. Taken after death. At first glance, it seemed nonsensical. Children in a classroom smiling, playing, come after death. The team cross-referenced archives, digging into coroner reports, school registries, and local newspapers. Then came the undeniable proof. The official 1899 coroner's log confirmed that every child in that photograph had been declared dead 3 days before the photograph was supposedly taken. Shock wasn't enough to capture the terror that followed. When the Truth Uncaged team printed the enhanced image for documentation, they noticed something new. A figure appearing in the glossy reflection. Standing directly behind the person holding the print, the figure was detailed, human-like, and impossibly present. Yet security footage from the lab confirmed no one else had entered the room. The photograph had created its own observer, a witness from beyond. The lab immediately sealed the photograph. Archivists prepared to destroy every copy. But in the final moments, a technician uploaded the image to a cloud drive, claiming it was for research preservation. By morning, the file had vanished, replaced only by a single line of text. The children never left. Even now, the photograph remains alive in ways technology cannot explain. The metadata updates itself at intervals, the timestamp shifting to the present day, as though time itself acknowledges the unseen presence within. Every new viewer risks awakening it, letting the shadows move once more across the classroom. The photograph, frozen for over a century, is no longer a relic of the past. It is a reminder that some truths do not remain buried. Some children, and some secrets, never truly leave. The real question lingers: who took the photo? And who, or what, continues to watch from the shadows, keeping the room forever occupied? 3 months after the Savannah case was declared officially closed, the research team at Truth Uncaged received a strange email. No sender, no subject, just a single attachment titled Savannah Audio 1839 WAV. At first, it sounded like nothing, a low, guttural hum beneath waves of static. The kind of sound that vibrates somewhere deep in your ribcage, like an old radio caught between dying frequencies. Then after 23 seconds, a voice emerged, soft, trembling, female southern accent. She whispered, almost like a prayer. He said death was freedom. But he still came back for me. And then, silence. But not complete silence. Because beneath the hush came a sharp, mechanical click, unmistakable to anyone who's handled vintage photography. A camera shutter, except this one didn't sound right. It didn't echo like a sound. It registered like sight. When the waveform was examined in the lab, the technicians froze. The click appeared not as audio, but as a visual anomaly, a thin, vertical line, shaped unmistakably like an eye. And hidden deep in the file's metadata was a string of faint, encoded text. When decrypted, it read, "The widow was never buried." The team ran the recording through every possible filter. They tried isolating frequencies, inverting channels, even slowing the playback to 1 frame per second. Each time, the same thing happened. At the 13-second mark, the system froze. The monitors flickered white for exactly 3 heartbeats, and then displayed, for 1 single frame, the image of an old sepia wedding photograph. No one had ever seen that image before. It wasn't part of any known archive, not in the Savannah Museum, not in digital registries. not even in the coroner's confiscated collection, and yet every person who worked on the file described the exact same photo. A woman in black lace, a man beside her, and something dark lurking just behind them. Since then, reports have surfaced from across the country. An antique dealer in Charleston swore the photograph appeared in a thrift shop frame overnight. A college student scrolling late at night claimed it flashed across her phone for less than a second. No one has ever been able to capture it twice. Because those who've tried say that the second time the widow's photograph appears, she isn't standing in the picture anymore. She's standing behind you. Some stories never truly end. They wait. They wait for someone bold or foolish enough to reopen them. The widow's smile still lingers somewhere, behind the glass, behind time, perhaps on a dusty shelf near you. And if you ever come across that 1839 wedding photograph, study it carefully. Watch the shadows, watch the light, and never blink. Because sometimes the photograph doesn't just capture a moment. Sometimes it watches back. Always watching, always waiting,